Welcome to this video on printing variables in Python. My name's Andy Wicks, and in this video we're going to look at three methods of printing variables on the screen in Python. However, one of those methods is not particularly good, but then that still leaves two, so why have a spare? Well, some people prefer this kind of notation, and some people prefer that kind of notation. I'm going to show you both methods. Before we start though, I need to explain this line here. Import datetime does a little bit of magic behind Python. The purpose of the import is to get some code that is not normally included in Python. In this case, we're importing a datetime set of codes. Please don't get hung up about this. There is a whole video on imports coming later on. Now, let's get down to the first bit. I'm going to define some variables. Here are the four variables I'm going to use today. I'm going to define a variable called happy, which says, I like programming, and then puts a line feed after it. You remember /n is a new line. I'm going to tell you my age is 87. And now I'm going to use that date time import that I talked about just now to get today's date. Finally, this is pi to 25 decimal places, but I'm sure you all remember all those decimal places anyway. So let's get going and let's run the program and see what happens. This first piece of code shows you what's in happy 3 times. So if you want the same piece of text multiple times, you just put star, which is times, and then the number of times you want it. So I've got happy set up as I like programming /n, and it says I like programming 3 times because I really do like it that much. Now let's continue. This piece of code tells you how many days old I am in 2 different ways. First of all, it does it by turning a number into a string. So str my age times 365 is taking the calculation my age times 365, turning that into a string so it can be used to concatenate with other strings. If you do that, there is no space included. Remember, the comma makes an extra space, but here the plus signs leave it as literally whatever the number of days is. The second way of doing it shows you what's called formatting of data. So here I'm going to format my age times 365, and I'm going to put the result of that into here at this point. What that says is use a comma to delineate the thousands, and if there were millions, millions, and so on. That means that I get the text formatted the way we'd expect to see it, as I've got here, unless you're watching in a country that would use a dot instead, in which case you would use a dot instead of the comma. This next piece of code displays today's date, but as you can see, it does it in a rather odd way. It gives you year, month, day for a start. Well, that is fine if you're a computer. Computers like things in year, month, day because it's easier to sort them. But it's also giving me time and minutes and seconds and milliseconds, and I really don't want all of that. What I prefer is to have that formatted nicely. So you've got this way of doing it that gives you whatever it gives you. And now we're going to look at 2 methods to produce the date in a way that is a little more sensible. The first way is to use something called an F string. So we've got today is, and then we've told it this is an F string by putting an F in front of the quotation marks. And an F string can be formatted. So we've got today in the format of day, month, year. Notice the B here. You'd expect something like an M, but what that does is it turns the month into letters. There are all sorts of ways of formatting the date, and there is a link in the video above to where you can find the information on all of this. So what we end up with is today is the 4th of September 2020, and it is. The next method is to use dot format in the way that we did before, but this time we're using it slightly differently. Here we're replacing today is and what's in the curly brackets with a particular format. So we could say day, month and capital Y for year, and that gives us the 4th of the 9th, 2020. I'm using UK date format, but obviously you can put these in any order that works for you. Now let's turn our attention to decimal numbers. We had pi, and as you notice when we print out pi, it doesn't print it out to the 25 decimal places we gave it. It displays it to only 15 decimal places. It does the rounding because it says, now I know what you want and you really don't want it more than 15 decimal places, which may or may not be true. What is better is if we have control over the number of decimal places it produces. And for that, we're going to go back to our friend the F string. So pi to 4 decimal places is, and then we have the variable that we want, so in this case pi, inside the bracket, and then 7.5. And what you'd think is that we have 7 places and then a dot and then 5 decimal places, but no, what we get is 3.1416. So what's going on? Well, what it says is the first number, the 7, shows you how many places it wants shown. So in total, we're going to have 7 spaces taken up on the screen. And of those, so the dot, of those, 5 are going to be the decimal point and however many numbers are left over. So if you want 4 decimal places, you need 0.5 here. What this does is it takes 3.1416, which is 6 characters long, and puts it in a 7-character space. In other words, it's producing that space here for us. Saves us having to put the space in separately. We can do exactly the same again using a format string. So a format, we're saying format pi and format it in this way. And the numbering system is exactly the same. So take what I'm giving you, put it in 7 spaces, of which 1 is the decimal point and 4 are behind the decimal point. So 7.5. And what we get is exactly the same as we got when we used the F string notation. But this brings me to another problem. What happens if we want to have more than one variable displayed on a line? How do we do that? Well, this is how we do it. We're going to use all 3 methods to display exactly the same variables. First of all, we could display today and pi, but that doesn't look very nice. You can't see where one starts and the other ends. It's not really particularly helpful. It would be much nicer if we formatted the output in some way. We can do it using an F string. So we could do it with today and the date format, followed by a space, a hyphen, and then the value of pi to 4 decimal places. or we can achieve exactly the same output, as you can see, using the dot format. Here we use the dot format and we list the variables in the order in which we want them to go in. And it looks for the curly brackets and places each of those in the right space, formatted in the way that we say. So the date is formatted to day, month, year, and the value of pi is formatted to 4 decimal places in a 7-space field. Well, there's quite a lot of ground covered here, but if you have a look at the video again, it might make things clearer.